Shalom, and welcome back to Bnei Noach Academy, Thoughts on the Torah. Please remember to hit the like button, to subscribe, and most importantly, to share this insight and inspiration with friends and family. If you look in the book of Leviticus, chapter 6, verse 5, verse 6, it talks about the fire, the constant fire that God demands of us to be burnt on the holy altar, in the holy temple. And it says the fire on the altar should continuously burn in it. Lot tichbe, it should never be extinguished. It should never go out. And therefore, the Kohen, the priests, would put every day eitzim, woods. That means they would put at least 2 little logs of wood on it in order to enhance the fire. And then it concludes again in verse 6, and it says, Eish tamid tukad al hamizbeach, a constant fire, an endless fire should burn on this altar. It should never be extinguished. Now, what is this fire? And what does God want of us? And how do we apply this to our lives? Because remember, God is talking to each and every one of us, even those of us who are not priests, and especially those of us living now in our times when we do not yet have the privilege of the actual, literal holy temple and altar. So what does this mean in our lives? How do we apply it? Well, the sages explain to us that every person, essentially, every human being, is like a miniature temple. In fact, there are some of the parts of our bodies that are very obvious, and we're able to locate them, so to speak, as in the holy sites, or I should say in the holy areas, even the most restricted areas in the holy temple. And that is, for example, your brain, your thoughts. That is the holy of holies. First of all, literally speaking, we know that the brain is the most sensitive thing. And that's why it has this thick skull around it to protect it. God forbid if somebody gets hit in the head or some trauma, it can be detrimental to the, first of all, life of the person. And even if that's not the case, but to the functionability of the person, whether cognitive or literally physical function of the person. The heart, that's the altar. That's where the fire burns. That's where the emotions are. That's where the passion is. And what God is saying to us is there should be a constant fire. That fire should burn. Now let's talk about the fire so we can better appreciate that fire in our hearts and what we're meant to do. You see, the truth is that fire needed no help. That is the fire which we read about later in the book of Leviticus that came down from heaven on the day of the inauguration of the tabernacle. That's the very first temple. That fire remained lit and continued to burn for years and years and years and years until the destruction of the first temple. So it traveled with them throughout. It arrived to Israel, and wherever the altar was situated in Israel, the fire continued to burn. That original fire never went out. No rain, no wind, nothing ever put out that fire because it was a godly fire. And it continued to burn. Later it was transferred to the big altar that King Solomon built in the first temple, and it continued to burn there. And right by the time of the destruction, it didn't get extinguished. It went right back up to where it came from. So that is well over 800 years, about 1,000 years after the fire had originally come down to this earth. Still, God says, I know that I gave you the fire. I know that fire comes from me. I know that fire cannot be extinguished, but I want you to do your part. I want your contribution, you, the human being. And this explains something very fundamental in our existence and the purpose of our existence. You see, when God created the world, the initiation came from him. He didn't have anyone, nor did he need anyone to consult with, to encourage him to do it, to give him the strength to do it, or to help him. He made the world. And the truth is, everything comes from God. However, it's God's desire that once he created us, mankind, that now we do our part so to speak, to initiate, to trigger that desire in him to give us and to do what he does anyway. That's the way he set up this, let's call it this chessboard. We need to do our part. So to speak, Hashem gave us the greatest gift, that we have what seems to be, so to speak, a contribution to what God is doing anyway, and he doesn't need us to do. He doesn't really need our strength. And in any case, even if we're giving from our strength, ultimately our strength is not ours inherently. It comes from God. It comes from Hashem. Hashem is the one who gives it to us. Hashem is the one who makes it for us possible to do what we do. But still, it has the appearance of it, and therefore it has the value of coming from us. And that's what God is saying here. You have your altar. You have your heart. In your heart, you have that fundamental spark of faith, that fundamental spark of passion towards God and towards what is good. But don't let it burn on its own. You have to contribute to it. You have to cultivate it. You have to enhance it. Give your own wood, even 2 little pieces of wood. Give your own contribution, but make it yours. And that is the lesson. We cannot just rely on that fundamental, inherent, natural faith that we have inside of us, which every single human being has, whether they'll admit it or not, but we need to enhance it. We need to cultivate it. And that's our, quote, making sure that the fire doesn't go out.